What you're about to see is not a news broadcast.
Today, near England's ancient monolith at Stonehenge, an extraordinary phenomenon is occurring that defies all explanation. Bizarre
cubes
are appearing overnight in scores of wheat fields across the country. Experts have no idea how they have been formed, only that they seem to have no human or natural origin. Who or what is responsible for their creation?
Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. UberBear, and today I'm joined by my other two hosts, and with always the loveliest of the two. Stu, how about you tell them about yourself?
What would you like to know?
No, I'm just kidding. May, we know who's the loveliest.
No, don't give our precious Stu that much. Give us your how are you doing, Stu?
I mean, I'm doing great, but he's absolutely right. Loveliest is never going to be a term used to describe me on this podcast or anywhere else for that matter. So, May, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. A little sleepy, but otherwise I'm fine.
Good. And exciting.
Yeah, we got a crowded house.
We have guests.
We do. People like us.
We do.
It's pretty cool.
we like us.
Yeah.
Truly
and apparently other people do too. Let's start right from the top.
Bones is on the top. He doesn't know that.
I should have specified that, shouldn't I? It's not the same.
Yeah.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Hi. Welcome to the Pod Bones. And we also have another guest.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel. Happy to be here.
So we've got Bones and Daniel on the show. And so if anybody ever watched the series Unsolved Mysteries, cue the music that we'll find on the internet. Before we go into this conversation, disclaimer. Unsolved Mysteries literally told you it was going to be an unsolved mystery, but we're going to do our very best to Scooby-Doo the heck out of this stuff as we talk about it. But we've got two fire starters in the room that started one of the most thought-provoking conversations we've had in a while that I then cherry-picked off the internet, pasted to Twitter, and then out comes all the emotions and the feelings. So you, the listener, as you partake in this conversation, we would love your candid feedback on where you stand. It's going to be a thin red line is what we're going to have.
Divisive topic, to say the very least.
So be okay with that. Buckle up. We're going to have some feelings. Everybody's going to have a little bit of opinions about this matter, and that's exactly why we asked the two fire starters. But I'm going to go ahead and post the question that I kind of pulled out of the idea that these two talked about, and I'll get their conversation.
Okay.
So, the bridge to cube is what we're going to title this episode. So our guest, Bones and Daniel, both started a little bit of a firestorm, if you will, in I believe it was the CubeCon Discord, if I'm not mistaken, but it kind of proliferated from there and it rolled into other Discords. And they may not even have known they did this thing, but they did this thing. So I took this question and I tried to formulate it, and I did it so poorly. And I want to give a shout out to our good friend Jason Brinkley, who came as my little savior on Twitter because people said, that's a lot of questions for a poll. Like, you asked 3 questions, 1 response. And I'm like, come on, man. What? And he's like, and he's a data analyst. And he's like, this is why the importance of statistics and data analytics is so important, because people want black and white binary answers. But what you'll find from this question, there is no black and white response. Based on a conversation with Bones and Daniel regarding a powered cube, which is the data-generated cube is what we'll refer to it. Right, Daniel? Tell us a little bit about that cube.
Well, that's just a vintage cube that I curate, where I don't actually make the card choices. An algorithm picks them for me, and I use that to make those choices via a sampling algorithm and then a card weighting algorithm.
Is it looking at Cube Cobra for this data? Is that how it's pulling this information?
It does. Yeah, it's Cube Cobra data and then Scryfall data as well to sort of augment that process.
So let me ask, is the card pool vintage level cubes? Is there some kind of condition that you put on this algorithm to determine like what cards you're putting in your cube? How are you making those measurements?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I'll probably be real quick here. Basically, the data that I sample are what are basically vintage cubes on Cube Cobra. They have to have the power 10 for cube, and then there's a whole bunch of other conditions about which cubes get sampled. So really, outside of just having those power 10 cards, the ancestral time walk Black Lotus, 5-box, and Mana Crypt Soul Ring, any other card is legal, and it really just kind of what comes out is what's left in the data. So.
Interesting. And so the drill down here for this conversation, because I'm going to continue the left off question mark that I put there, is Daniel was proposing that the data generated vintage cube, correct me if I'm wrong, would be a great like final countdown cube for CubeCon 2024. That's what sparked this conversation. And then insert Bones. Hi, Bones.
Hello.
You had some feedback on this particular debate, whether or not it was the appropriate viewing point, 40,000 feet overarching idea of what represents cube to you. Is that an accurate statement?
That's close. I think it is a perfectly fine final cube for CubeCon, and I think it is one that would make a lot of people happy. I was kind of joking when I suggested that I think the final cube should be a desert cube because it's more skill testing than the average cube draft.
I would agree with that 100%. You'll watch people drop off like flies when you start having to choose a basic plains over, say, a Thalia just because. It's a weird experience. We know all about this now. We're learning infantile stages of this idea.
Skill intensive, yes, and I suppose you could apply the following statement to any cube, but I've certainly seen comments go to the extreme both ways when it comes to desert cubes. Some people really, really love them, love the skill intensity, love the fact that it gives you so much to think about outside of just shall I take this fetch or this shock land. Now you've got to think about drafting your, like, down to your basics that fit the color. A lot of people love that. A lot of people really, really don't like that. It's very polarizing. Maybe the most polarizing type of cube that's out there. So whether or not we'll ever see that as like the grandstand finish for a major cube event remains to be seen. I'm going to err more on the side of hell no, even absolutely not, just by virtue of the fact of popularity. But yeah, I agree. There's definitely, I don't know, there's something there. It's cool.
Guess I need to make a magnetic cube in order to have the next most polarizing.
So this conversation kind of erupted
I'd say
from
I'm sorry, but I'm not.
this little debate about what the final countdown cube should be. Because obviously Daniel was passionate about the idea that the data generated, in fact, represented the community's choices using the algorithm, as you mentioned. And Bones has that thematic construction idea that comes from another aspect. And I heard some words there, skill testing. And that's kind of what we're going to kind of go through as we do these two conversations. So I try to take all these conversations. Joe Anderson got plugged into this conversation. A lot of other people, even BK got involved at that point, which I was trying to get him on the show as well, too. A lot of people had emotional ties to what happened from this conversation. So I took it and I said, there is something here to unpack. I mean, obviously, just from the chatter that was blowing up on that Discord alone. So I took it and I threw it up on the Twitterverse for a 24-hour period. And I got 134 votes over that period, which is a small little minuscule idea of that. But the question, and here's my three-part weird three-problem question that I put out there, the three-body problem. Question for the community. Vintage Cube. MTGO, for example, serves as a bridge or expectation for the expansive world of Cube, ? And here's where I run on sentence a little bit. And should it be the benchmark? ? Feel free to expand on your thoughts in the comments. Happy Cuban as we do.
Numbers were very interesting to me. So I'm not going to lie, I was expecting this to heavily favor Vintage Cube being kind of like the poster child for Cube. The community, or at least those of them who responded to this poll, the majority voted no. 49.3%, 41% for yes, and just under 10% of uncertain. That surprised me a little bit.
On the smallest sample size you can imagine.
It is a small sample size.
But it's okay. I think
those sample sizes are going to be cube folk, right? I don't know if just, random non-cube players are going to be in there. So there you go.
May I have a question for you? Based on these just generic results, we're all going to be biased on this opinion. Everybody, that's why I want everybody in this room. It's a council. A council's judgment of none's what's going to happen. But May.
To be fair, we do have one person for each color of Magic, so we could just be the council. No,
you could be the council. We do. Do you feel like this poll from your Magic experience is indicative of where you think Magic is trending these days? These feelings from the Cube standpoint?
Clarify your question?
That was what happened with my first question. It wasn't very clear. Okay, let me take this back. So Cube, I want all of you to agree with this, is we like to rock on that we're the indie rock of Magic. Would we all agree with that statement? We like to think that we're the pioneers, especially the desert people. And I'm gonna have a hard time, Daniel, saying you're the pioneer. The computer's doing it, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Fair enough. There's a lot of flavors of that sort of Cube Curator, though. So I think there are a lot of fantastic pioneers in the Cube community.
And I don't get to be the
One's looking
gatekeeper,
at you.
to be clear, of what is indie rock. Let's just start with that as a basis. I want to step
I know
back
you
on
just hated
I just
saying
100%,
that.
but I just did that. I
You
did that,
hated
but I'm
saying
going to
that,
admit
didn't
what
you?
I said wasn't formulated very well. But what I'm asking is, do you feel amongst the three of you, and I'm going to ask May, Daniel, and Bones, that this poll is showing a trend in Magic, even though it's 100 humans? I know that's not a thing. What do you feel is happening with cube curation these days?
So, I guess I'll start off since you asked me first. I feel like that a lot of the community responses to this was 3 questions in one, and kind of getting jumbled in that is definitely murking the waters a bit in terms of whether or not this could be showing any sort of trend. The other side is just that it's just a really small sample size. 100 people is not a lot of people. It's not an irrelevant amount of people. 134 is not nothing. But the problem is with statistics is that it'll never be big enough. And I do think that there is a trend within the cube community where we've done a pretty good job of sort of rebranding ourselves within that, where I would say that a lot of cube interactions people have as non-cubers is just more of the, like, trying to cross the street and somebody's trying to sell you their mixtape. Where it's just like, hey, you should play my cube. Hey, you should play my cube. Well, you should play my cube. And it's just like, well, I'm not here to play cube.
No, you just go,
I'm here to play
And I say
Commander,
this
darn it.
entirely
Cube
calling
out
out
of my
myself.
face.
now you can just cube or sing on TikTok and get an album. Hey, Daniel, so you're the one that has the one that's computer generated. That's important to me. And I want to restate and take back everything I said before. My question that I have for you is, do you feel like the data that you're pulling, how often does your cube change? That's a good question. Like, how transitional is your cube? How much is the data being, I guess, churned?
Great question. So, the cube can be updated as often as we like. So whenever, you have the inkling to update the cube, you can rerun the algorithm. You can tell it how to sample. You can tell it within those sampling parameters, you can say how recently the cubes that you sample must be updated, for example. And so that's one lever you can use to sort of tweak what data kind of makes into the final cube product. And so, if I ran it today, the list would be slightly different than when I ran it 3 weeks ago. So it's always up to date, as it were.
I have a follow-up question before I go to Bones on that. Is the power level upshifting or downshifting overarching in that data-generated cube? I have a reason for asking that.
Well, later. I would say in a vacuum, that's going to power upshift constantly, because people who are building vintage cubes are always looking to put the most ridiculous cards, power level cards in their cube. So
that's what I was.
Yes.
Bones. Where's...
Did you think it was downshifting?
No, never. I wanted to just have you say the thing. The thing. All right. You said in the beginning, skill testing. Where do you think cube is transitioning now in your world? Looking at the CubeCon cubes, I'm formulating your question a little differently here, creating my own bias, but where do you feel like cube is going today from your perspective?
That's a big question.
I do that.
I agree that the power level is rising. I also agree that the complexity is rising, generally. Cards are getting murdier. They're also doing things that are friendly to digital, like with Arena coming out. They're kind of leaning on that a lot more, I think. You could see that with Dungeons. The Ring tempts you. Rosewater has explained that having helper cards in the packs is allowing them to kind of move some of the complexity off of the cards themselves onto the helper card that everybody can access. But yeah, that has a real toll whenever new players are attempting to get in the game and don't open exactly that helper card.
So I'm the one that put the most thought in this because I wrote this forever and had all this time to ponder. So bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, as I mull through this. But my question that follow up on that, you as a judge, is Magic getting harder to judge or cleaner, or what's it looking like on your call count now?
That's interesting. I don't know if I can answer whether it's getting harder to judge because I'm getting more experienced as I judge. So if it's remaining the same amount of difficult for me, maybe that means it is getting harder. But it's another one that's really hard to answer. Yeah. I don't think that the rules they're introducing are any more confusing on their face than the old rules. For example, like they changed fading to vanishing just because players misplayed it so frequently. So, like, I don't think that there's any reason to say that the newest Bloomblur mechanic is just inherently more confusing to a new person than something from Nemesis. But I think that they're has been some small effort, and you're seeing that in Bloomborough, to reduce complexity. But for the last couple of years, complexity has been going up and up and up and up. So I don't know that it's like a diagonal line straight up of complexity, but I think that maybe it crested recently and now is going potentially back down.
So I've got one more question. I've got a lot of them here. Daniel, so as power creep and change and transition of cards, and you're tracking what users enter into their cubes, you're sampling on an algorithm. That's a correct statement, right? Is your cube becoming
and
more...
also what people are picking, though.
Right. Is your cube becoming more complex?
Yeah, it certainly is. So, just like Bones, mentioned, there's things like initiative. I don't think there's any ring tenchu, but there's just a lot of, really wordy cards. I think we recently did some data analysis on the CubeCon 2024 lists, and you can look at the mean, Oracle word text count, and depending on the cube, that was quite variable. And for example, the Gavin Verhey's commander card cube, that the mean word count on that thing is insane. It's almost 50 words per card versus say 20 words for some of the other ones, like the Alpha Reimagined cube, I think, which is very appealing for its simplicity. So, yes, to answer your question, there's definitely a lot of that increase.
So a question on that complexity thing before we move into the comments that we got based on this poll. Mm-hmm. Bones, would you say as a curator, how are you leaning towards your card selection these days? I'm just going to ask that. I'm going to let you answer that in your own words. I don't want to overly formulate that. What's your driving factors?
In a lot of cases, I think it's been really convenient to be able to go to Scryfall and eliminate big chunks of new card sets because of some mechanic that plays really well with itself. And that's not to say that it's so parasitic like Splice Onto Arcane from Kamigawa, but there will just be some mechanics that come out that are ideal for some cubes, but not a broad swath of cubes. Like, for example, in Call Time, I remember eliminating Snow and maybe Berserker or something. I eliminated 3 things, and it was over half of the cards in Call Time I had no reason to consider whatsoever. And so as they've been making sets recently that are more and more loud with their themes, and that's making it a little easier for me to decide which cards to consider, because on the other end of the spectrum, whenever you have a Power Max cube, you can only consider, some percentage of the cards anyway, because the rest aren't viable for the level that you're playing at.
I went through this like I was in a speed trap here, and I jumped over because this conversation is exciting. And I didn't do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, but we're going to do it mid-episode, which is totally weird. And because we had dogs barking, we might be minus a stew. I'm going to go ahead and start out with Daniel. What are you having for your libation today?
Well, it's still the middle of the afternoon where I'm out on the West Coast, so I am enjoying some good old-fashioned H2O.
How about yourself, Bones?
I was going to have a Sprecher, but I started this Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream at lunch, and I'm finishing it now to sound like an ad.
And May?
I actually am having the alcohol for once. I'm having Apothic Red Winemaker's Blend.
And I'm going to have this lovely Raleigh Brewing Company Melon Pop Watermelon Sorbet IPA. That's pretty crazy. And Stu?
Same deal. This was my offering for the episode. I thought this would be fun.
I told him we broke all this tradition. When mid-episode listeners are like, where's the drinks? Where's the drinks? Even Bones is like, where's your drinks? Let's crack them open. All right. Continuing the conversation. I always like to do the loop backs. I was taught by an English teacher a long time ago to keep reminding people of what you're talking about. So the question for the community, Vintage Cube, MTGO, for example, serves as the bridge or expectation for the expansive world of Cube, ? And we'll just kind of put that there. And then question, and should it be the benchmark? This was what I kind of extrapolated from the conversation that both Daniel and Bones were having. But before we answer that actual question, Daniel, you'd mentioned a little story here. What happened to you? Seattle, little pregame?
Oh, yeah. Right. So right before we recorded this episode, I went down to downtown Seattle, had a work meeting with a member of the tech community, and I knew that this person had played a little bit of Magic casually, and I asked him kind of, what do you do now? And he goes, well, I just kind of draft my friends from time to time. We kind of pick up whatever we have lying around and, just draft that. And I thought that was very interesting because that was very similar to Cube. I'm like, well, have you heard of Cube before? And he goes, oh, what's a Cube? So, by extension, he kind of has already been drafting Cube with his friends, which is, it's fantastic.
And to chain off of that, this past weekend, I wanted to test all of our CubeCon cubes. So I brought out the Monopoly, Chris brought out his peasant cube, and then we had a good friend Kirby bring out the creative cube. And we wanted to run this to the ringer because we thought we'd have 16. And in true cube fashion, we actually have 15 because that's how we do. But of the 15, we had 3 players show up because I kind of put it out to multiple Discords in our local area from the UberCubeathon thing. And 3 people showed up. And one of them actually knew about Cube. The other 2 said, oh, I'm just here to watch. And I said, no, that's not how Cube works. Cube's not about the watching. Cube's about the playing. Let's get some playing going on. And one person goes, well, I've never played Magic before. Oh, you'll be fine. We will help you through this. We will doodle out we're not going to talk about stacks. We're going to talk about creatures. We're going to talk about defense. Oh, you play Hearthstone? Oh, okay. We can kind of bridge from that. Or you play RPGs. Okay. We can kind of conversationally bridge from that. And then admitting that drafting is not the best way to start, that we really laying a groundwork, right? And then we brought over our friend Greg, who was in the Air Force. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a safety guy, some form of training. He's got a lot of training background, as do I, but I'm also drinking a lot of beer. We're at a brewery and I'm the host, right? So I'm the butterfly. Greg sits down, he's happy, and you get 3 people to draft a Bant enchantment cube. And Greg was successfully able to explain how to draft. Is this card any good? Don't worry about it. Just get it. It's blue, it's green, it's white. Just pick this. You like the art. We kind of did the same thing that someone did to me almost 20, 25 years ago. And kind of just taking it back to the basics. Don't worry about it. Get a creature. Look at the numbers. Do you like those numbers? Does it have the word flying on it? You know, all the simplistic things that we did when we were all kitchen table Magic. That was kind of how I think most people learned how to play Magic. Most people didn't learn how to play Magic from hopping into a powered vintage cube. Am I wrong on that statement? This is why I asked the committee to come here. I'm going to go through the committee. Did most of you learn how to play Magic from a powered vintage cube? Stu?
Nope.
May?
Nope.
Daniel?
I did not. I actually learned from Commander, and that was a mistake.
Yeah. But it's a good communal way to learn. Bones, how'd you learn how to play Magic?
Not through Vintage Cube.
No. But...
I did.
Okay, you did.
Yes, I did.
Okay, that's what I wanted. I wanted a dissenter.
Yes.
Explain.
Because... So at the time I started to play Magic, I started playing with a friend of mine. He and I bought a box of Born of the Gods way back in the day. We bought the box, we did some drafting, we did a bit of deck building, and then he went on his merry way back to Canada for the rest of his life. That was only a week, and then I stayed here in the US. Didn't have a play group, didn't go to an LGS to play, so I didn't really have much of an outlet to learn how to play Magic. So if you can't really play much Magic, the only other way that you can really learn how to play Magic is by watching other people play Magic. So, yes, there was a time eventually where I got with you guys and we started playing Commander. But even with Commander, there's only so much you're going to learn, right? Based on the kind of decks that you're playing and the decks that other people are playing. But I was still churning through tons and tons and tons of content on Twitch and on YouTube. And this was a combination of watching Modern, right? So people like Andrea Mengucci and Aspiring Spike, watching Legacy and Vintage play, and also a lot of Vintage Cube. And that really was my Magic university for a long time. And I would argue still is to this day. I don't consider myself any kind of particularly strong Magic player, good enough to get along, but I still find myself to this day learning a lot about Magic just purely from watching Vintage Cube content. And then when I play Vintage Cube, I felt that even the first time I played it in paper or when you're playing online, I felt like I had that preparation that I wouldn't have had even if I'd have spent 20 hours a week playing Commander or 20 hours a week playing any other format. The fact that I was able to learn from that content that's all online. And this is going back to, go back to look at your question, right? Does it serve as the bridge? And these are the 3 words: bridge, expectation, benchmark, right? Why is it the bridge into Cube? Because it's the most accessible, because there's more content about Vintage Cube than anything else, right? You could argue, well, there's enough modern content creators, YouTube, so on and so forth, Commander, there's plenty of Commander out there. But as far as specifically Cube, there's more streamers and YouTubers that focus on the Vintage Cube than anything else. So it's the most accessible from a content perspective than any other cube. It's also the most accessible because all you need to do is download, I don't know if you pay for an account on the Modo client, and then you pay your 100 play points or 10 event tickets or whatever, and now you've got access to that Vintage Cube there as well. So it's the easiest to watch content and learn from. It's the easiest to get to and play unless you've found a play group that has that, those options for Cube built in. The only thing that I would argue against is kind of the benchmark, but I feel that, we talk about Cube being a format. I would actually rather say that Cube is a selection and a collection of formats that are all kind of rolled into one. So I don't necessarily think it should be I would say it's the benchmark. But as far as what is the poster child and what is the introduction point and what can serve as that, it's the Vintage Cube. And it's not even close.
Okay. So
I appreciate that viewpoint, Stu. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say Bones and I had a side conversation. So we're the indie rocks. May's the indie rock person. The fake cube is the indie rock. We're the punk rockers, right? That's how I'm labeling all of us, right? And I'm gonna go so bold. I love me some Vintage Cube. You guys are the Nickelback of Cube.
I'll be the like 80s, 90s dance electronica.
You little Daft Punk.
Nice.
We know we're the best.
I told you,
we'll just let you guys think you are.
So Bones and I were having this little small chat here. Bones, what do you think about this? I love Daybreak Games, and they've done a great job. And I've seen what they've done as far as making the powered Vintage Cube and all the cubes that they're hosting. They've made them better, in my personal opinion. They have more pizzazz, more spark. They're less linear. They're more interesting. They're really rocking the boat. But I sent something to Bones, and he and I were kind of chatting about this a little bit, that the Moto is going to be Daybreak Games is working with Ultimate Guard, if I'm not mistaken.
It is Ultimate Guard, correct.
In Vegas. They're going to Vegas, and they're going to be doing $65,000 worth of...
The finals are in Vegas. So we're recording this on the 18th of July, 2024. And actually, through this coming weekend. So if by the time you're listening to this, you probably won't have too long if you want to jump on what they're calling the feeder cube channel or the feeder drafts in order to get in on this. But yes, you start out with these feeder cube drafts, and then you can progress on to another stage, and then another stage, and then ultimately for the top 8, there is this all expenses paid trip to Las Vegas where you get to be top 8 and draft a power Vintage Cube, and there's like a Black Lotus in there, and there's all these like conditions that they've put on, like they're only using alpha and beta printings for all the commons and uncommons or something like that. So they are really going all out to promote the Vintage Cube, and I suppose by extension you could say Cube in general.
May, where does that put us with our little indie rock?
We're going to get 10 more listeners.
So I think that it is important to note that Vintage Cube existing and getting platform and support in the way that it does is not a net negative for our small indie rock versions of Cube or whatever. Because at the end of the day, we're still getting people in the Cube. But I would say that the main obstacle is once people are kind of getting used to the idea of Cube is getting them over the hump of, oh, Vintage Cube is what Cube is and nothing else as outside of that. And it's just like, nope, it can be anything. You can create it, you can play it, you can do all kinds of things with cards that have been printed, cards that have been sharpied. There are so many other ways to play Cube, and the problem is just getting over that assumption, if you will, or that, what's the word I'm looking for?
Power
expectation.
Max. Yeah, right, the expectation. That's kind of what I wanted to ask. So, May, if you had a free, like, to the winner, foiled out Countryside Crusher, we might be able to compete with Daybreak Games. What do you think?
Not a
Fake Cube?
I don't think it's going to be a day.
Daniel, you had a response.
Yeah, May, I actually really appreciate that, what you said really about, like, you can do Cube is just so many things, because it really is. And I don't think that, the kind of that dichotomy between like Nickelback or like 80s dance music and it's really fair, because like there's just so much creativity in the Cube community. Vintage Cubes happen to be one little facet of that, and the majority of the cubes that we do spend our time playing are going to be these wonderful creations that we have spent so much time curating. And further, that the Daybreak Games thing, that thing is interesting. Like you said, you're going to get more people into Cube generally. Fantastic for those people who get to top 8 draft, alpha, beta cards. I don't know if I like the idea. Maybe might promote a bit more spikiness, getting up into the top 8 draft, which I think is a little against what I view as the spirit of Cube personally, which is sitting down with, some friends and having a good time.
And I secretly like Nickelback. Their Dark Horse album was
You
stellar.
can leave now.
So
Get out
Bones,
of my house.
Bones. How do you
All right,
feel?
this is our show now. We're kicking him off.
Do you
I
agree?
may, and the only other host that I have.
Bones, do you agree with these statements in terms of it just gives more visibility to Cube? I stand actually in solidarity with that statement. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the more people that learn about it. Then we have to do the conversion. And the conversion, the downplay of the conversion, like, well, have you seen Countryside Crusher? I know that you have seen Lelia, but have you seen Countryside Crusher? That's a hard thing to bridge, that conversation, and to get people. It's interesting in our own group dynamic. We've got our good friend Kevin, who's going to play with us tomorrow night. And he was a legacy vintage player. Like his collection could buy my house. I mean, let's just be real. Like that's a little
Maybe
scary.
not now. Prices have come down a little
but
bit.
it did then. It's scary. And to take him and now get him to play the Monopoly cube that's, virtually worthless, or a Pauper cube, but he still plays it with the power max level card evaluation expectation. He drives it into a harder level. He pushes harder, takes a little bit of time, still does the card flicking, all the things, right?
Well,
But
I think that goes back to something that May said a long time ago when she drafts her cubes with her. You've got different kind of personalities, right, within your group that draft the cubes.
Yeah.
And the ones that are the absolute hyper-competitive players, they're always going to draft and play with that attitude. Or most of the time, that's what they're looking for. Maybe that's the way that they get fun out of playing Magic and playing Cube in general. But I feel like we need to have a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of appreciation for just the personalities overall. Like, my introduction to Cube was through the Vintage Cube, no doubt. That doesn't mean that every time I play Cube, I want to play the Vintage Cube, or every time I Cube, I'm just looking to power max, min max the draft and trying to go for the most broken stuff possible. I am someone that enjoys to have fun. I like to just play Magic for fun. And sometimes that fun is just doing something goofy with a Pauper Cube, or doing something goofy with a low power thematic cube. And sometimes that is trying to draft the most broken Storm or Artifact or Reanimate deck in the Vintage Cube and go 3-0-6-0 and not have any consideration for my opponent's feelings other than go sit over there where the Pauper players are playing, please.
All right, Bones, I'm going to put you on the spot. I've got in our show notes here, if you want to check it out, the pros and cons section. And I tried to bullet these points about the Moto kind of idea, the MTGO. And I'll read them to him, and I'm going to ask you as the judge, put on your judge hat for a minute. So we're playing Moto, so you know all the Power Max cards, you know what to expect. I would say a pro, familiarity of cards. There's the word staples comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Pro, powerful gameplay. Would you agree with that statement?
How could I not?
Daniel, how do you feel about that? Those two so far.
I mean, those are both definitely facets of a powered vintage cube, though you can have both familiar cards and powerful gameplay in many different environments.
I love it. Pro highlights technical gameplay.
Yes, it can.
I see. I like it. Daniel?
It can. Same.
Con, entry level is prohibitive at times, as in it is power maxed.
Magic is expensive.
Well, let's remove cost. Let's remove you've got it fully proxied, it's free to you, whatever. Somebody gave you all the cards. Is it harder to play that type of cube from the judge and from Daniel's perspective? And May, I want your opinion too. We're doing
I
a
would
bridge.
not recommend a new player learning how to play Magic the Gathering from Vintage Cube.
Okay. Daniel, how do you feel about that statement?
I feel this statement is context dependent. So it really depends on the experience of the drafter, and it's so easy because everyone's so familiar with Vintage Cube that it seems that it's less prohibitive. But really, if you put a drafter in a Vintage Cube environment in a vacuum, like against like any other cube out there, it's going to be just as complex, I think, as most, if not many other cubes out there, with the exception probably of like sort of special draft rules cubes like desert cubes and things like that can be more complex. So it is context dependent.
And then
Sorry,
we put
no
a
black and
con.
white here.
We put the con on there. It was affordability. I mean, that was kind of just already there. If you didn't proxy it, you wanted to purchase it, you wanted to go out and purchase Aqua's Cube, you're going to have to take 3 mortgages off on your house. You should be able to get it at that
2
point.
mortgages nowadays. Two mortgages.
2 mortgages should cover it, yeah. May, how do you feel about these statements we moved through the pro and con list?
So, I do think that it is context dependent. I do agree with that. I think that it's important to keep in mind that what the cube is designed to do is not always catered to what is entry level or what is, let's say, good for casual players of Magic. right? Because when we sit down with a vintage cube, there are vintage cubes that still retain a lot of just what are the current most powerful cards, or there's vintage cubes that just have a lot of the classic powerful cards. And depending on how mechanically complicated it can be, it can get complicated. But that doesn't mean all vintage cubes. If we're referring to just MTGO, it can get very complicated. And there is certainly a barrier to entry, but it's definitely not the most complicated out there in terms of like complexity.
So I have a bold statement, and I want everybody to tell me, all four of the people on the other panel, to tell me if I'm a paper player. Let's go ahead and make that clear. But I think Arena Cube is with the most accessibility, widest reach, is the best way to start the fire now, to get the spark going. Is that an unfair statement from all of your opinions?
I don't think it sounds like it, at least from comments that I'm seeing on social media. There's a lot of players who are enjoying the Arena Cube, who are getting into Cube through the Arena Cube. And I would say it's inevitable that becomes the portal into Cube for non-Cube players, right? Because you don't need a group. All you need is a computer. You sit down, you've got a cube in front of you, and you play it.
How do you feel about that, Bones?
Yeah, or your phone. So, yeah, I think it has a huge reach. And I think that was actually my initial thought to your part A of your question on Twitter, which was, is it the gateway? MTGO Vintage is becoming less and less the gateway as the Arena Cube becomes more and more popular.
Daniel, do you agree with that statement?
I actually don't know enough to give a really qualified answer because I don't know anything.
We got a little bit of internet struggle. You're kind of like the weatherman that's standing in the storm on the Weather Channel going, well, Paul is dead. But it's raining outside, folks. Bring your pets and dogs inside.
It is raining.
I'll take your word for it, though, on the Arena Cube. I don't know enough about it. And if you guys say it's having a really positive impact,
it's fine.
But becoming a stronger bridge, fantastic.
So
I think any exposure that cubes can get in, I would say, popular Magic spaces is going to be a positive influence. Anything that's beyond just us frantically trying to sell our own cubes.
So what I'm really hearing is no matter what the cube is, out of all the opinions in the room and all the jokes aside, is that the visibility is still what it is, right? If you play Moto, we'll find you, we'll seek you out, and we'll try to get you to play 100 Ornithopters. We'll try to get you to play Uberbear's Artifact Cube, the Amakar Desert Cube, right? We'll find you, we'll evangelize you, but you still understand the premise of the draft. Would you agree with that statement, Bones?
Yes, I think Cube owners are trying harder and harder to reach every corner of the Magic fan base.
I would agree, and that's kind of where I made my strong statement that Arena Cube, because Arena, the reason why I have that opinion, I don't play Arena. I have, though, when I'm in a hotel room and I'm bored, and what it does is have a nice little development platform. Hey, here's how you play Magic. Here's the steps. And it makes you run through all these little annoying things. You got to go through that whole little precursor, right, before you jump into it. And once you get there, then you buy your gems or whatever you do, right? But what's neat about it is it kind of teaches you how to play Magic, and then you understand it, and you build a deck, and then eventually you can just try to cube, and it's like a platform, but it also skips all the steps that Moto does, because we talked about this before. My biggest hang up, we worked with Cultic Cube at the time. I was testing out his Choreography Cube, and I cast a Walking Ballista 4/6. It was going to kill, I forget who I was going to kill. I was going to win. All my mana went over to the left-hand side of the screen. I don't understand this. I don't know how it works. I've played Arena. I hit enter. My Walking Ballista immediately goes to the graveyard. I lose the game because now I just took all my mana and didn't actually seed it over from the left to the right.
Okay, so Moto is definitely a little bit more on the manual side of things. I actually think as a good Magic player, right, and I'm not saying me as a good Magic player, I'm saying a good Magic player will want to have the client be a little less autonomous when it comes to the decision making. You'll want to have full control over everything from how you tap your mana to all the X values and all that kind of stuff. I think Moto actually does a very, very, very good job of that, although there is a bit more of a learning curve from what I understand. But Arena definitely is more newer player friendly. And you can see that from comments again, where you look at social media and people are looking for, I want to we're not talking about Cube. I'm just looking for a way to get into Magic, right? I'm interested in Magic. How do I get into it? How can I play it? go and download Arena. You've got very cheap ways to be able to play all kinds of different formats. Yes, you might have to grind a lot for gems and all that and convert cards and all this kind of stuff. But there are options for you in a very inexpensive way to go and learn about the mechanics, just to figure out if you're going to enjoy Magic. And then if you do, amazing. Let's take it step by step from there. And I think that's why having a cube in that client is so valuable.
I think it is too. So we got a lot of responses, and I kind of want to touch point on some of these responses as we control time here a little bit. But we got from Tyskos Elk, because this is the first thing. This is 2 different questions with different answers. I realized after I formulated it. 1, yes, I think Vintage Cube sets an expectation. 2, no, this is not ideal. Vintage Cube is designed by and for extremely enfranchised players, making it a bad entry point. And I say this as an extremely enfranchised player, and got 6 likes to that conversation. So we're going to go with 7 people believe that to be true, which is interesting. So the next one we got was from Cube Corner, MC Amsterdam at the time. This was from May 10th. The best benchmark for Cube should be any retail limited environment. Did you have fun with this now at 170 booster box? And wow, it's expensive now, as he says, or they say, excuse me. Make it into a cube, play it forever, and you can modify it until I like that. They just open up a box, turn it into a cube. Like, let's recycle, reuse. Like, that's an attitude. I like that. That's
what a fantastic way to be able to kind of live the dream again and relive sets and blocks that you were a huge fan of, right? Go and get boxes, and if you really, really enjoy the gameplay, then just take all of your favorite cards, stick them together, and now you have a cube.
The next one we got from Sky Scrowl J, also MC Amsterdam, visiting as well. It definitely serves as a bridge, and unfortunately the expectation as well. We got a tone here, right? That's kind of what we talked about. The Unsolved Mysteries is not biased. We have no, dog in the race here, but we're expressing the viewpoints of the community. I don't personally think it should be the benchmark other cubes are measured by.
I agree with that.
Bones, Emmett, you're the pioneer. You're the dog father of all things desert. I think that reflects upon you.
Not
right?
accurate.
Well, eventually, someday, the Amakar Desert Cube is going to be on Moto, and then we'll have a whole different conversation about this conversation. Would you agree?
Yeah. No, I don't think it'll ever be on Moto.
Arena. Let's go. The next one.
On Arena, but we can talk about that later.
I like Emma Partlow's answer. I just want Legacy on MTGO.
That has been on MTGO.
Yeah. And we got Live the Dream, actually, featured from David McDarby this week. Bones?
Going back to what Stu was saying about getting a box, I think that is the best place for a new player to begin Cube.
100%.
I agree.
I'm going to sound like the professor, but I would say don't buy a box. Just buy all of the commons and uncommons in the set for like $40. But yeah, and then you can sleeve it and play it over and over. And then that is what gets players to really enjoy games. Any game that they have started to play is whenever they get the familiarity and they complete the mastery loop. And then they play something that they know how to play and can demonstrate something they've learned in a later game from a former game. And that's one of my hurdles with trying to say that Vintage Cube is a good place for new players to start, is because it's a 540. You might see different cards every single game and they all do different things, that it takes a lot longer to complete that first loop where you've seen something in a previous game and now you've applied it to a future game. That I think something like a set cube is actually the perfect place to start Cube.
I would agree.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And then, just echoing what Stu said too, like I agree, that's fantastic. And, again, I don't really think there's any specific expectation about what Cube can and or should be, because it's really just some collection of cards that someone has put together. So there's really just a wide band of things that people can do and enjoy. And so the way that Bones described it, where you have basically faster iteration times over smaller, sort of simpler, maybe commons and uncommons collections, that probably is a fantastic play experience for someone who's newer.
Our next one is from the Grand MC, the master himself, the person we love, Andy Mangold. But this next one was the one that the quills came out a little bit here. Andy had the quills, right? So no, double exclamation mark, not one, but 2. The more cubes I play, the more I feel like Vintage Cube really only caters to a very narrow range of players. That most people consider is a baseline for what Cube can be is a blight on our beautiful format.
I'm not sure what the
23 likes.
Yeah, I mean, only caters to a very narrow range of players. I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not even sure how you would sort of put metrics for that?
I've thought about this a lot. I've unpacked this a lot. And I'm going to kind of go Team Andy a little bit here. Just bear with me. And there's a reason for this. Having the vintage cube, when I first made it, that's what people wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
When I made, and we've moved down the line, people know who I am now, but when I first made the horror cube, I just want to play your vintage cube because I had a different group of friends in. And I would have to almost argue to get my horror cube played.
Well, you just don't take
and then
it
they
with
would kind of just go, well, I know you like that cube. It's almost like sympathy for the devil at that point, right? But did you bring your powered vintage cube was the question that came up more often than not. So the more I thought about this and having listened to their show, I kind of get the vibe here more than, but he did choose war, did choose violence, but I do like it. And it did spark a little bit more conversation that we'll say for another time. But I thought it was interesting. And I surprisingly get where he's coming from. Like, it makes sense to me from a person that's kind of done that uphill battle of, I made this first thing first. I had a hard time getting over that hurdle for the second thing. I wouldn't call it a blight, Andy. Love you, but not a blight, but definitely something that makes it more challenging. I would call it a challenge.
I would say a desire to play a single cube, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know if that necessarily says that it only caters to a narrow range of players. I think you could argue that, you know, if your argument is that all these people wanted to play Vintage Cube, then that's not excluding another range of players that don't want to play the Vintage Cube, right? They want to play it. What's to say that other people also want to play it, right? No one's saying they don't want to, at least. It seems like the people that you're playing with wanted to play that and they didn't want to play your other cubes, and maybe they didn't even want to play other formats. I don't know if you took Commander decks or Modern decks or Vintage decks or whatever. So I don't know. I will always argue against anything that seems a little too deterministic with a statement like that, right? It's hard to make a definitive statement like that where you're talking about a lot of other people really without the metrics in front of you.
I think we had passion on this conversation.
Absolutely.
This was passion.
And I think that's maybe another side of the coin, right? Is that I feel like there's a lot of sentiment that Vintage Cube is just one format, right? One sub-format, if you will, within the greater expansive cube. And I think there's maybe a little hesitancy and a little dislike towards it because maybe it has become so prevalent and it has become such of that poster child, right? Where when you talk about cube, a lot of people will immediately, their brain will go to the vintage cube, right? That's, again, it's the most accessible. That's where all the content is. And yet people out there are very, very passionate about cube and they want it to be, I don't think they want it to be not about the vintage cube. I just think that they want vintage cube to just be this one little minuscule slice of the pie in this grand format of cube, and for it not to overshadow the just many, many amazing cubes that are out there, wonderful experiences that might, you know, that the prevalence of that might just suck players into where that's the only cube that they know or that they want to play. So as much as I don't know if that's, I would necessarily agree with the statement, I think the sentiment is what is important. And that is something I definitely agree with, right? Because I don't want to just go and play Vintage Cube every single time we play Cube. I want to play the Femme. I want to play the Horror. I want to play the Peasant and the Pauper and so on and so forth. And I think that's a much more important message, certainly that I would say to, you know, anyone who's interested in getting into Cube, like, yes, the Vintage Cube is out there and it can be a whole lot of fun, but don't let that be what defines Cube, period, because there's so much out there that can be an amazing experience.
Bones, how do you evaluate everything he just unpacked here?
That was great. I agree. As someone who does not like Vintage Cube, I agree with everything you just said.
I don't dislike it, but I also don't love it. May, you?
So I think the important thing to mention here is that it's not that Vintage Cube is a bad cube. It's just its prominence being the definition of what the format is kind of misaligned. And it's hard when you're trying to get people to sit down and play the cube that you spent a long time to build, that you've tested with people online, that you've put in the elbow grease for, and then they're like, okay, but this isn't the Vintage Cube. Even though it was never part of the discussion, it was never part of the expectation. It is just the overarching expectation that they might have, that it's like, okay, but this isn't like this other thing that I already am familiar with. And that can be a difficult obstacle. And I can understand why a lot of those resentful feelings can bubble up within the Cube community, but I am still firmly on the fence that Vintage Cube is still a net positive. And, like, yes, it may be an obstacle in that way. it's still getting people to cube.
It's like any news is good news, right? Bad press is good press kind of thing, right?
And for the enfranchised players as well, like, there's going to be enfranchised players, and I would even argue, and I've actually seen comments like this where the players, like the really long tenured, and certainly those players that have been involved in the highly competitive side of Magic for an extended period of time, that's what they want to play, right? They want to play the highest power cube that they can. And if that's what those players want, absolutely more power to them and good luck. Yeah. And I hope you enjoy it. But I would also argue that there's going to be enfranchised players out there, and I would argue myself as somewhat enfranchised by now. I've been playing for 12, 13, 14 years or whatever. I am enfranchised enough that I do want more out of Magic in general, right? That's one of the reasons why Modern was fun for a while, but then Commander was fun for a while, and now Cube is fun for a while, and maybe there's something else that'll come along down the line that'll grab my attention. The wonderful thing about Cube is that because it's this collection of formats rather than just a single format, I can go from playing Vintage Cube and have a whole lot of fun, and then I can go and play the Horror Cube literally 5 minutes after we put the cube away and have just as much, if not more fun.
I was just going to say that I think that it's an important clarification that I don't find a lot of drive or passion within the Vintage Cube. It's not something that drives me, and then there's a lot of players who also would feel the same way. That do feel the same way, where they would just look at the Vintage Cube and then just be like, yep, sure, this is just an environment with a bunch of strong cards. But where's the thing to sink my teeth into, whether it's a plane, whether it's a flavor, whether it's just a certain type of power level, regardless of where people are sitting, I would say that the amount of variety that exists within Cube is significantly more vast than the Vintage Cube, despite the Vintage Cube's popularity and size.
But I would say there's a bit of Regency bias there too, because, you know, you and I like to build budget up, right? We like to do top-down design. So it's hard.
Well, I wouldn't even say that either, because like when I went to CubeCon, I was more interested on it. For me, it was like going to a buffet, and I want to try like a little bit of everything. I'm trying to get like that little bit of sample platter of, oh, I want to try this one. Oh, I want to try this one. Oh, I want to try this one. Versus the people who were trying to spike and go up to the points. They were trying to pick like the one that they knew that they can consistently draft to get the points. So the ones that they knew that they could consistently win in and whatnot.
Bones, I'm going to read this next statement from an individual, and I want you to unpack this for me. You're going to play a host here. You get to do this. I'm going to read it out loud. You unpack it. I got my thoughts. I want to see where you're running the show right now. Here we go. Professor Whitebrick said, I think it serves as a bridge because in some ways it is the ultimate. You can play anything you want. Nothing banned. Everything goes. Nothing is too strong. From there, you can branch out onto other versions of anything you want. Anything goes.
I would retort that you can't play anything you want because the power level excludes a vast number of Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah, that kind of seems like what's the word I'm looking for? A conflicting statement. Cube as a whole, yes, absolutely, play whatever you want. Nothing's banned, anything goes. But when you're playing just the Vintage Cube and people set down for the expectation of just the Vintage Cube, your selection of cards are significantly lower.
You can play Open Fire, which is a 3-mana lightning bolt, and also no one will draft it, and whoever ends up with it will not play it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you can play anything you want. I don't know how you could ever make that statement in Q period, right? There's always going to be cards that are power outliers on the upwards and on the downwards. So, yeah, I don't agree with that. And I also don't know if you can branch out into versions of anything you want / anything goes, because that's just cube curation in a sentence and not a particularly accurate one.
Well, I want to push back on all three of you. I think I know what this person's trying to say. I'm here to defend them because I let the court do it. The kangaroo court has adjourned. But what I'm thinking they're saying is the equivalent of a rule 0, where all of you kind of leaned into the 25, 30 years of Magic, right? And the entire library of Magic. What I think this person is saying is that I can play whatever I want, when I want, and Bones, you're my competitor. We're in a moto, and I'm going to kill you on turn 2 and you don't get mad about it. Versus I kill you in a turn 2 in a Pauper Cube, you probably should get really mad about it because something's wrong. I think that's what they're trying to say.
Okay. From that perspective, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, Twitter lawyer got it. But you see what I'm doing? I think that's what they're trying to say is you're restricted to the highest tiers of Magic because that's the player expectation that drives that formula, kind of like the data Vintage Cube. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on to the show.
I guess I wasn't taking off my curator goggles for a second.
Well, I think
realized that it's more of the reference of playing as mean as you want without your opponent.
That would be the better answer. Yeah, you sportsmanship out the door. Let's all just kill each other. There'll be blood on the sidewalk.
Well,
That's what they're saying.
I think that power level restriction.
And I'm okay with that.
I think that power level restriction is what makes it what it is, though, right? When you've got a vintage cube and you've got no power level restriction, really, then that means, going back to what Bones was saying, you can't play anything you want in a vintage cube. You can't add anything you want there because then you're just going to end up with chaff that's unplayable. Whereas in a thematic cube, now you've got homes for those. You can play anything you want. So I'd argue that it's not that vintage cube serves as the bridge because you can play anything you want. I would argue that it's cube is that entry point so you can play whatever you want.
I would say that there are books that you can check on in the library depending on what type of reader you are, right? You want a little fiction, you want some spice, you go to this section. You want this, you go to that section. That's what Cube gives us, right? It doesn't have to be one thing or the other. It's not binary. But sometimes we've argued amongst ourselves that has that vibe that we have to say. And as I told this story, hey, Anthony, did you bring your power cube? No, I brought my horror cube. Oh, okay, well, I guess we'll play that.
I am never
We know
sad.
you love it. But it's interesting. Hey, Daniel's back.
Hey, Daniel.
Daniel, you missed the kangaroo court, but you are in the final thoughts as we do this. So we're going to recap the pros and the cons. We're going to make this short and sweet. We've talked about this. Daniel, your data generated cube, do you feel that it's a strong representation of how, using your subsets, your information for your algorithm, it represents what the Power Max type community really wants to see out of Cube? Would you agree? I just led the witness a little bit there, but
So the data generated vintage cube is, if you're doing cluster analysis, if it's 100% the centroid of a cluster of powered vintage cubes, which is the aggregate decisions that cube designers are making about powered vintage cubes at 360.
You should just follow the Uber Bears Power Cube. It's a 540, and just use that. That's a pretty good data generated one, in my opinion. I worked on it today. Yeah. You just use that. It's nice. Pretty conclusive. Just represents everyone. It's great. I added 6.
Whatever helps you sleep in
it. It is sampled. Well, if I ever do 540, it gets sampled in that data set. And it is definitely in that sort of collection of data points. So you're in there.
So, Bones, do you have anything to add as we kind of did this? As I benchmarked this with, I want to read the question again. The question was, question for the community, Vintage Cube, MTGO, for example, serves as the bridge or expectation for the expansive world of Cube, ? Should have ended it there, because polls don't work past this. And should it be a benchmark, ? Feel free to expand your thoughts on the comments. So I think we've done a pretty good job of representing different subsets, different groups within our indie rock groups, right? I made the Nickelback joke, but I do love Nickelback.
I think about telling how we feel about Vintage Cube, right? Because I think Vintage Cube just means something to everybody, right? And I think whether or not it was your avenue into Cube or whether or not you see it as a net negative or a net positive, I think most of us were fairly well in agreement that it's a net positive, because it gives that introduction to players that might not be familiar with Cube in general, with its accessibility. But it's definitely got its flaws as kind of the poster child and that most accessible from either a content or a playability perspective. But you know what? Maybe that's just part of why we're doing what we're doing. Again, we're not a vintage cube podcast, right? I don't know any of the We're not just talking about what is the pros and cons of the vintage cube. We're not always just, should this card be in there or should this card be out? We're always trying to introduce and talk about the positives and sometimes the negatives of Cube in general. And I think that's just part of the responsibility that we all have as a community, is just to keep putting the word out there and, we'll let the rough end drag. But I'm a vintage Cube fan. I love drafting it.
I can't do it. It's too much clicking. Bones.
You don't click in paper.
There's a lot of clicking.
You don't have to click your mana.
So much mouse control.
When you're casting a walking ballista.
Sure, Anthony.
Well, I appreciate Bones and Daniel. I appreciate you both coming on. I wanted your perspectives. Listeners, if we've literally got you all sparked up and fired up, that means we want you to come on the show and talk about this. If you're like, and you're yelling at the clouds right now and you're throwing whatever out there, because we've heated you up, That was our intent. But I guess the overarching is we all saw it as an introductory platform. We saw it, but mostly on the presence, the reach, right? Same thing with Arena. That's ultimately what I was saying there, is that people can access that. And kind of joking about what I joked about early in the episode, when I asked for 16, I got 15. It's hard to get humans to come to one central location without beer and whatnot. So that's kind of the problematic and why these digital platforms can be prevalent. And hence they set an expectation.
Yep.
Whether we like it, love it, or dislike it, doesn't matter. That's what happens, right? They got better publicists than we do. I'm not giving out.
Be mad at the expectation, not the drive to the community.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Thank you, Bones. I appreciate you. Bones, which event are you going to this weekend?
Steel City Cube in Pittsburgh.
Hell yeah. You have been a busy man traveling around. Sorry,
Yes,
this is a shout out, and sorry that we didn't have you at the UberCubeathon. They actually had an in-house person. I really wanted you. I asked, I tried, but they got him for free. He had a debt to pay with like magic cards, but
You can't beat free.
Yeah,
That's right.
And Daniel, thank you so much. Please send us a link to this vintage cube. I think it's fascinating to have it on there. I truly appreciate both of you coming on. May, thank you so much, too.
Absolutely.
Thanks for just being you.
And we'll put the socials, or if you guys want to let us know, Bones, we'll start with you. Where can people find you in the socials and in the Twitterverse?
You can find me on Discord at Lucky Looter. You can find me on Twitter at Goblin Gathering, all one word, my favorite card.
What's the third one?
And the third one?
Yes, Bones.
I don't really have a third. Oh, you can find me in person at most major cube events.
Daniel, you were just on a podcast. You want to tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. So there is a podcast so Cade Goforth has a podcast where he interviews cube designers. I was on that a couple weeks ago, so maybe we'll link to that, where I kind of chat with Cade about the design process for that data-generated vintage cube. If people are interested in how the algorithm works and how I sample the data.
Twitter?
And yeah, so I'm not on Twitter. I would try to avoid that place as much as possible.
Congratulations.
Personally, but
As you should.
thank you. Yeah. You can find me on CubeCobra. If that's a good place to reach out to me on the blog there. Just leave a comment. I'm pretty good about responding. The other place is on Discord at Logarithmic. I'll send you the spelling because it's teenage me came up with the spelling and now it's stuck with me forever.
The inescapable.
All right, quick little promotion here, as we like to do here at UberCube. First of all, the Capital Cube Championship 2024, August 17th. We've got a link to the description and a link to get your tickets. All proceeds of that cube event are going to So Others Might Eat. Fantastic cause there. Go check them out if you're in the area and feeling some cube. In the 17th of August, again, that is a Saturday. There is also Cube for Cause, which is August 24th, 2024, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's a twice a year 64-player for charity event in Brooklyn. Go check them out. For this year, all profits will be donated to the UNRWA, an aid organization supporting Palestinian refugees. And you can find all the details on the ticket form. And I can't even remember what is there a link to that?
Yeah, it's right there. Don't worry about it. Just say something like, it's not there. I'll handle it. Just say I'll handle it. Anthony will handle it.
And we'll put a link to that one in the Cube Notes. Well, first of all, thank you too much to our wonderful guests. Want to thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us today. Again, we're going to put links in the show notes. Go check them out. Check their Twitters. Check their cubes. Pieces of art. And again, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us today. All right. First of all, let's give a huge shout out to our patrons, to Brian Keaton, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nick LaPointe, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Big thank you to all of you guys for the ongoing support. Really does go a long way towards keeping the lights on. If you want to get involved in the discussion regarding your favorite format, it's your favorite format's favorite format, which is Cube. You can check out the drafting page at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube, where our resident Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, is an admin over there. And you know what being an admin to a Facebook group does to you?
It means we're almost crossing 900.
Your power is unlimited.
Unlimited.
As always, if you love the show, we would truly appreciate. Give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can also use our altersleeves.com/UberCube affiliate link. Go get 5% off your purchase, as well as our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link. Go check out Inked Gaming. Not just for your mouse pads or your playmats, but if you want
large volume products,
bulk volume products, You want to get your whole neighborhood into Cube. That's the place to go. You can also reach us at Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also hit us up via email if you've got a question about an episode or you just want to have a longer chat. You can find us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. As always, we always push for the Discord. Lots of cool conversation going on there. I want to see those decks. I want to see those deck boast channels just going absolutely bananas. And we also have a new little forum set up. If anyone out there has either got an old cube, a new cube, whatever, you're just looking for help. You want some advice. You want some feedback. Come along, post your cube. We've got a ton of people in there who can give some great advice.
I'm going to throw the Sushi Cube project that we're working on, Sushi Go, and we're going to push it up in there too so we can start getting feedback there.
I think that's the best place for it. Let's get some comments. Let's get some sushi. And again, huge shout out and a big thanks to all of our Patreons. We are at patreon.com/UberCube. Really goes a long way towards keeping the lights on. And, these microphone stands ain't cheap. And that being said, we're going to do what we always do here and say Happy Cubing!
Look at this photograph.
Yeah.